We're a brand-starved nation, especially in a country like India where there is so much asymmetry and that you can bridge it as an entrepreneur. Just giving you examples on why celebrities work when they work, because one, they are, either native to the digital audiences that a lot of D2C brands are going after, right? And Shraddha Kapoor is a prime example. She talks about lipstick shades, and she's a certain generation as well, right? The early jobbers, college students, that generation is who she appeals to. So that is a very perfect fit for the kind of brand profile that we also are going after. Resonance is there, right? And therefore the clutter breaking happens. But not every celebrity will do a great job.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Danda Insights podcast. I have with me a leader who's truly seen how India has changed over the past 10 years, how internet commerce has come up, and she's someone I really look up to. I have with me Miss Naiyya Saggi, who's the co-founder of the Good Glam Group and who ran Baby Chakra, a very solid platform for parenting in India. And I feel this is truly, and through our conversation, we'll cover a lot of things about the industry, but more than that, about how a leader, when India wasn't as digitized in 2015, actually built her company to what it is today and partnering with the who's who of the industry. Thank you so much, Naiyya, for joining me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I'm so excited to actually have you home to do this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing us in your personal space. We really, really appreciate it. Awesome. Shall we get started?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
Yeah. I want to start with a question which was a recent observation for me. One of our friends, they got blessed with a baby boy and we wanted to buy a gift for Shivai, who's their son, right? And I went into the store, I built it, and I was surprised at the cost of, say, like a Chotu apparel. It was as much as a Levi's denim, right? So I have a question for you. I mean, is kids apparel a high margin business? Because it seemed like a very Chotu product, but the price point was high. So do you think that's the case?
So it's a very interesting question. And just recently, I was evaluating from an angel investment perspective, a specific entrepreneur who's actually making kids apparel.
Okay.
As I look across the multiple sort of constructs that kids apparel companies have taken on, right from, being marketplaces, then going on to, having players like a Hopscotch or a First Cry, really then relying on imported products like a Carter's, right? Coming in and playing in that space. And therefore, kind of appealing to the brand hungry Indian parent, and that sort of cohort, to now sort of seeing where people have moved more to saying that, the reality is that the Indian kids apparel market is still extremely unbranded. So about 90% of it is still an unbranded play. It's still, what you would find, on the streets, in a Crawford market, in a Garya Hart, depending on, the city you come from. And the reason for that is while the margins may still be high, like it's about a 60% margin game in some categories.
Oh, wow.
The problem statement is actually the cost of customer acquisition, right? And also the seasonality of the products, because apparel anyway is a bit of a seasonal product play, right? And the number of SKUs. So these three things make kids apparel an extremely difficult business to play in at scale. So what do I mean by that? One, in terms of the CAC, right? Parents, and especially like parents of young children, are a very specific cohort, right? Not every family has young children in them, right? So to acquire that cohort, you need to do a certain set of activities, be it marketing, be it discounting, be it price positioning, be it like having, offline presence, right? Which is an expensive proposition to acquire that cohort, right? So CAC is always high in a kid's apparel space. Number two, of course, seasonality. Apparel is a very seasonal play. We all know that. And it's not just seasonal in terms of weather. It's also seasonal in terms of trends, right? So you kind of see like festive wear do pretty well. Indian festive wear do pretty well even for kids. But a lot of the other stuff doesn't really get that much traction from a branded perspective, right? Because kids are outgrowing sizes. Kids are outgrowing, occasion wear, or the weather keeps on changing, etc. So for a company to keep up and to have like inventory kind of done just in time is not easy always, right?
Correct.
And always end up having a lot of dead stock, which they need to then figure out how to pass through. And the third, I would say, is the fact that when you're looking at, this whole piece around building out brands in this space, again, the informal market is so large and so price competitive. A parent doesn't really want to pay that delta most times, right?
The
premium, right? Because they're like, my child will outgrow this. So I think it's these three pieces that make it extremely difficult for apparel businesses in India for kids to scale so far.
Interesting because okay, from the outside I felt because it's a high margin business it's good, but the fact that you mentioned about like the seasonality, the CACs are super high, and then like the inventory that you have to hold, so like the working capital that gets blocked, that I feel makes it a tough business.
And to build a brand, therefore, in the space, right? And therefore, then to stand for something that is not just like a discounted play, but actually is a substantial branded play.
Got it. So that you can charge a premium.
Correct.
But do you think the fact that 90% of it is unorganized, there is space
massive opportunity.
Okay.
Which is why I was evaluating that company for an investment
sense,
case, right?
Yeah.
And you do see, I think there is a certain cohort where it lends itself very well. And I'm talking about the Instagram first cohort, the social media first cohort, where parents are not really concerned about the price. Point at which you want to buy kids apparel, right? I mean, I would still say a certain cohort of Indian customers are not price conscious, they're value conscious, right? So if you're getting like a good, like celebratory, Indian festive wear outfit for kids, which you want to buy for that kid's Annaprasan ceremony or for Diwali or the third Diwali or first Diwali of a child, you're willing to pay that premium. So there's definitely, I think, pockets. Or, birthday party dress. I mean, I remember talking to the Hopscotch founder many years back, dear friend, right, Rahul, and he was like, the most selling product we have is a pretty pink dress.
Oh, okay.
So they would run that point in time Facebook ads, and the starting, part of the carousel image in the carousel would be the pretty pink dress. And I would get all the people to come in at least to Hopscotch at a lower CAC to actually, come and explore.
Got it. That had a higher CTR, which would get them to
higher
the website.
CTR, absolutely. And then
Okay.
I would actually mean like at a lower CAC overall and a higher AOV.
Oh.
Because what they would do is they would come for the pretty pink dress, and they would buy the ribbons, the shoes,
add-ons,
the accessories alongside, right? So occasion wear was always like a draw in the branded / a little bit more premium price segment in apparel, in kids apparel.
Interesting. And okay, I just want to, given you mentioned how you've seen companies get built, I want to take you back to actually say 2007, around that time when you're actually a law student, if I'm not mistaken. Like you were pursuing law. And most people in India who study law don't move towards entrepreneurship as much, right? So how does Naiyya, who was a law student, go from there to actually, being a founder and then building a company of her own? So just fill us a little in that.
Honestly, it's been a journey, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
And it's been a wonderful journey. One, I'm very, very grateful for the journey I've been on, right? With all the highs, all the lows. But, law school was a very formative experience for me. It was an experience where, it gave me a lot of exposure to an amazing peer set, right? A peer set that was very ambitious, that was very driven, was very spiky. So in McKinsey, we used to use a term called spiky, which means you're very good at a certain thing.
Correct.
You don't have to be good at everything. You can't be great at everything anyway, right? So what are you really good at, and have a lot of respect for that, right? So there were peers of mine who were fantastic debaters, maybe not great academically, but no one cared. But there was a lot of respect for them for debating really well.
Yeah.
Or moot courts, right? Mooters, we used to call them. I was a mooter myself. Superb at mooting, but like maybe not good at basketball, but that's okay, right? And then of course you had your cricket and football, and you had the sports like spiky folks, right? And what are people who are very good at the social sector? So I think one big aha moment at law school was that, you could be really spiky and make something of yourself, right? You don't have to be like great at everything. Like, I think in school you're taught to be a bit of a generalist, right? But law school was different. And the journey from law school to entrepreneurship was very convoluted. I actually had an offer from a law firm in London after law school called Clifford Chance. It's one of the Magic Circle law firms. It's one of the best law firms in the world. And I was super excited about living a life in London. But then McKinsey came to campus. And I didn't know what McKinsey was. As a law student, you don't know what consulting is. But I was really impressed by the fact that, McKinsey, of course, does great presentations. And I love the vibe of, solving for business problems versus maybe creating them to as a lawyer.
In a way,
So I think that is my attitude. That's always been my attitude, right? I was like, that value system resonates more with me. So I joined McKinsey. And after that, it was just a life that, just opened up a world of opportunities, because I was working with a lot of top CEOs in India. And I had seen some of them were first generation founders. So I could see them build their businesses. I could see the impact business has. And I was like, this sounds like it could be a really interesting way to create impact and to build a legacy.
So did that drive you towards entrepreneurship? Like just
It did.
spending time with them, observing them closely?
It did. I mean, I think what I realized was, and I've been a very idealistic person growing up. So for me, it was always a trade-off where, where could I create, my parents were civil servants. And by the way, I come from that generation where we say, government servants. We don't say government officers, we say servants. Because there's a service to society that they signed up for. And that was always ingrained in us. You talk about your dinner table conversations being business, right? Mine were about, if you have one life to lead, how do you give back to society, right? How do you create impact at scale? So for me, I always thought that it was, business, and I grew up in Calcutta. So it was always this whole thing about, business is bad, right? But I think at McKinsey, I learned that no, business is actually a force of goodness, especially in a country like India, where there is so much asymmetry, and that you can bridge it as an entrepreneur. So seeing that firsthand made me rethink what business can do.
Okay. Interesting. And then from there, you went to business school, and then after that, Baby Chakra, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So just share a little about that as well.
That was an amazing journey. So, I was very lucky to make it to HBS. I do count my blessings there. I was also very fortunate to go on 2 scholarships, honestly, Gaurav. I went on the Fulbright and Tata Endowment, and I will always forever be grateful to the Fulbright Trust and to Mr. Tata for the scholarships, because again, I come from a privileged background, yes, in the context of India, but certainly not a background where I could afford it in HBS education,
of
right?
Course, it's damn expensive.
It's very expensive. And even if I'd taken on a loan, I wouldn't have had the liberty and the flexibility I did after graduating to come back to India to build something. I would have had to work my way out of that loan, living in the US. Correct. Exactly. So HBS was very special. To give you some context, I was in this, you RC, the required curriculum and elective curriculum, RC, EC years, right? First year, second year. And in my first year, you just get, spots allotted at random. And I was sitting next to a Navy SEAL, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I didn't even know what a Navy SEAL was until I understood, oh my God, these are like the most premier, defense personnel in the US Army. Right? US Navy rather, right? And the conversations we would have together, Dave and I, were just crazy, right? The kind of missions he'd been on, and stuff that he couldn't even share with me. In fact, there was another, interestingly enough, Navy SEAL as well, who'd been part of the whole Osama mission, right? So there was it was insane. And then we had another student who was in from China, right? Extremely, vocal about the inequities that the Chinese society was facing and was exacerbated, right, in China. And she came from a very humble background. And there were also folks who were there in from China, the students, but came from very, very high privilege and a lot of wealth, right? So privy to some of the discussions, HBS happens in a classroom debate setting, right? So I'd see Ishan and I won't mention the other guy, but having extremely heated debates on what are the right policies for China and the Chinese government to undertake going forward into the future that would make the Chinese economy and the Chinese society a lot more egalitarian, a lot more equal. And a question on whether even equality was even something to aspire to, right, for that economy and for that people. And it really opens up your mind, because that kind of a conversation, you're not privy to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And I think the second really special thing about HBS was that, and I reposted this recently as a story on my Instagram, the way HBS professors prepare for their cases is another level.
Really?
Right? It's like a theater. And they will prepare hard. They actually spend part of summer preparing and knowing everybody in the class. When they come in, it's a very, very superbly facilitated discussion, right? Where they're kind of setting the context and they're setting the bricks, and then you kind of build the house based on the discussion that you're all having, right? So, that's another amazing experience. I was never academically inclined growing up. I was terrible in academics, but HBS,
You went to NLU, that's not true.
No, but honestly, it was because of my entrance exam. I wouldn't have made it with my marks. If it was a mark cutoff, I wouldn't have made it. It was an entrance examination, so I did well.
Okay.
Then that's the real truth. But I loved studying in HBS.
They inspired you to
to read my cases, to learn, to talk about our cases like a proper geek, to go to other schools in Harvard as well. Harvard is a community, right? It's not just HBS, it's also Harvard Med School, Harvard undergrad,
all of these,
Harvard Law School, Harvard, the Kennedy School of Governance, right? To go around the campus and just immerse myself in learning in amazing situations.
Yeah. I can relate a little because I'll take you back to one of the conversations I had with somebody who done the AMP program at Harvard.
Yeah.
And he was telling me how he had as his peers, like I believe it was like a building or a villa where they were locked in. They had to solve the case for like quite some time, and there were 8 people, and he's the MD CEO of a listed ethanol manufacturing company, and a couple of his peers were actually head of states, was the MD of Goldman Sachs, was somebody from Australia, again, you know, from, I believe, the military. So when you have peers like these and you're discussing with them, I think just the perspectives and the approach to solving a problem that come in together, I think that was a wonderful experience he described, and I can sort of relate a little to what you said as well. So I believe that's what makes Harvard special in that sense, right?
Definitely. And Harvard is a general management program, right? And the kind of context, therefore, it gives you, right? So we were doing all things like, business, international governance and the economy. That was a program, that was a course, right?
Okay.
And so like Biggie, we called it, right? And where else do you get to know about like international governance and economy in the MBA program, right?
Yeah.
Where do you get to do a whole course on just economics or do just a whole course on, the history? It was extremely, and with a very strong focus on leadership. So I think the big also aha for me there was there's no one style of leadership. In India, we grew up saying, okay, the person who's speaking the loudest is a leader.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Hippo or...
and unfortunately, there's a certain kind of leader, right? I mean, you grew up saying, and these are also gender stereotypes that kind of manifest themselves through centuries of how India has grown, right? It's, in both... It's
patriarchal.
Patriarchal, right? But you suddenly realize there's no one style of leadership. Because you see everybody is sort of a very different type of leader, and that is celebrated and that works. So that was really special as well to see play out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. I at some point in time, even I aspired to go to Harvard as well, but I did the same math as you, right? I mean, it's expensive, and if I were to really put off my loan, it would be like a 2-year commitment of MBA and then 3 years to put it off, and that was a 5-year commitment if I were to go to, say, like a B school and aspire towards it, right? Not saying there is an entrance person, I had to crack it, but I felt like the 5 years, if I were to spend it in India, they'd be a lot more rewarding because India is growing at a phenomenal pace and so much is happening here, right?
Yeah.
So just take me a little to 2015, if I'm not mistaken, when you actually started Baby Chakra, right? And from my research, I read that you actually interviewed about 500, 600 mothers before starting it, right? Perhaps via your experience, if you could share the process and how important you feel is actually validating an idea before starting to build it. Because I see a bunch of my founder friends who just jump in because they had a few conversations, felt this is something that they want to do. But like just researching and identifying who you're building for, what are their pain points, of course helps, right? So just share a little about that process. And firstly, how did you identify 500 mothers, then reach out to them? What did you ask? And then what did you discover over time?
So, you said this well, there was certainly... So, okay, let me kind of take a step back, right? While you do compliment me on validating the idea, there was also a bit of a punt that I took. It wasn't like the idea was like superbly validated. There was a big need. Now, how the need would play out from a product perspective was something I was using a lot of validation on. Let me put it this way, right? And to do that, I was meeting mothers. So literally, I was sitting and, sitting over coffee or going to, houses because mothers are busy people, right? They're extremely busy. They have a newborn child at home or they're like, managing work and, kids, etc. So very busy people. So to respect that time, I'd go to their house and like be part of that family for a day, observe them for a little bit and sit and do the wireframing with them of the app we were building out or the MWeb we were building out at that point in time and say what is most helpful, the navigability, the usability, the CTR, like the funnels, trying to understand, right, what's working, what's not. And I think, the big sort of, I would say like the big insight that I would keep on getting from mothers is that they need a partner in this journey, right? Okay. And they need the support because being a first-time mother is like, it's like you're traveling to a destination which you've not traveled to before, right? And therefore, on that journey, what are the watch-outs you need to think about? What are the right ways to make certain choices? What are the choices to be made? Or what are even the decision points that you will come across, right?
Correct.
All of it is new. And all of us, 70% of India lives in nuclear families. By the way, I've been shouting about this horse from 2015. And it's only now people are realizing that this is such a big demographic shift we are seeing in India overall, right? So in that construct, in that paradigm, it's the mother, the father in most cases, if they're married to, if it's a traditional marriage. And that's the two people making decisions. And the most critical decisions are around your child and around the mother's health, right? That you will ever make. as a family unit.
Correct.
So I think the big insight I got at that point in time was that they need like daily, hourly, by minute companionship and a guide that helps them make some of these choices much easier and helps them navigate this journey of early pregnancy and childcare, right?
Correct.
And that's what we took back to therefore develop the product. Now, in terms of how we then therefore made the product, like I said, we would do the wireframing with mothers. We'd also, by the way, build in a lot of expert care providers like doctors, HCPs, and prenatal nutritionists, postnatal therapists, early childhood educators. So we have an expert's perspective as well weighing in. Now, how did I find all of them? I wasn't a mother when I started off,
Correct,
right?
yeah.
And it was tough for me to percolate into an ecosystem of which I knew nothing. But what ended up happening was I used Facebook groups to figure out my first cohort of mothers. And I also formed a basic Facebook group called Baby Chakra Mom Stars and a Baby Chakra page, right? Where I would myself post like parenting advice and content, etc., and build communities out. And through that, I would figure out mothers who would be willing to help me, reach the right sort of decision points on the product journeys.
Interesting. I think, I'm glad that, you're speaking about how you embedded yourself in the user's life, understood what they really want, and then eventually those were how the product decisions were made. I feel now, given it's become so easy, and the digital ecosystem has evolved, people, as much as I would like, or rather as much as they should ideally do customer research, they don't, and just, on the whims, sort of people build product, but that's not the right way to build products as well.
It's not, because it can never be, because you're building for someone, right? So if you're not building in their perspectives,
then it doesn't work.
Or like solving for their problem statement, then what you're doing is futile.
Yeah.
Bluntly speaking.
Yeah. And from there to from Baby Chakra, and of course you've had quite a journey, and then eventually a larger group that you sort of formed together, the Good Glam Group. So how did that work? If you could just fill us in on that as well. And one question that I want to ask you, and this is very specific to how the group is structured as well, right? It's built using a lot of acquisitions, right? As roll-ups. Of course, Thrasio was the first and the globally largest, but it didn't, it had its own course. But we've seen, or rather I want to ask you, do you think it's different how it's played out in India, the entire acquisition roll-up strategy? Because there are quite a few players. Good Glam is one, I believe. Mensa Brands is also there, right? So if you can just share a little about how, Baby Chakra sort of merged into the group, and then how different acquisitions together have played out from a synergistic point of view.
So it's really interesting, right? So with Baby Chakra, on a couple of things, product-wise, etc., we were a little before our time, I'd say, right?
Okay.
And it was interesting because, as an entrepreneur, you're constantly trying to figure out the right business model for yourself. So we started off with a services marketplace. So we, consolidated 25,000 services. We had a service provider app. It was insane.
We had an urban company, but
for mom and baby. In fact, interesting you say that, because Abhiraj and Varun actually reached out to me when they were beginning urban company. They were like, "What was your experience with services in India?" Because we were building it out at that point in time, and I was very candid. I said it's really tough. Actually, payments is the toughest piece, and the disintermediation is the toughest piece, right? But of course, now they've built at a time where UPI is a norm.
Correct.
So the digital payment infrastructure is built out. You have the digital public rails, which I really miss. I wish I had at that point in time.
Interesting.
Right? But disintermediation is still a reality, and that's why you've seen them kind of go back full stack, right? While if I look at a services marketplace by itself, the disintermediation still is unfortunately true, right? But so that was the first kind of business model. The second kind of business model was being a marketplace for products. Think of it like a first cry, if you will, right? And again, there we listed about 40,000 products. A very lean team, but we did all the grunt work, put them out.
That scale of SKUs?
Yeah. And across categories where we knew there was demand, saw some very good traction there, but the margins didn't make sense, right? Marketplace margins are very
especially with returns, it takes a hit.
Oh, correct. Absolutely. And the second thing was, of course, Amazon Baby was on a roll, right? So Amazon Baby had money to spend. It was already a 500 million, revenue
in India.
In India. Right? By the time we were okay, I don't think marketplace is for us, right? We don't have deep enough pockets.
Capabilities for it,
Fair, absolutely, right? And to have a full stack. And then the third thing then we did was we launched our own products. And then I think the big aha came to us when we realized that, and our community actually told us this, right? That why don't you launch your own products? And so we launched our first set of, 4 products, which we had, I think, 6 months of inventory for. We were we have enough time to, sell this off, etc. Bej denge. And we launched on Amazon because we didn't have our own D2C stack at that point in time. And in 3 days, we got blocked on Amazon because Amazon's team told us that this is some sort of a scam. You could not be having the volume of sales you're having without running any performance marketing ads, right? Not even externally on any platform, not even on Amazon, not on AMS.
Correct.
And we were like, but it's not, it's genuinely selling. So I had to reach out to my McKinsey network, to Samir, who was at that point in time a director at Amazon. Now he has Jubilant Foods as CEO. And I had to request him, like, Samir, can you please help unblock us? Trust us, we're not scamsters.
Yeah.
And so he helped unblock us. But that was where we found tremendous product market fit, right? And I think the power of community then, right? Because what we built with so much effort over so many years, honestly, Gaurav, the trust, right? That what Baby Chakra nikalega, it will be very good. It will be for my child. It will be for me. Safe hai, maine acha hai. Number two, the insights. We were the first company, I think, in India, if I look at it, to talk about label padho moms. Now label ingredients and all in food and personal care are such a norm. This is, I'm talking about 2020. तब लेबल का एजुकेशन, लेबल लिटरेसी कोई देखता ही नहीं था. But we were seeing this insight from our community that how do parents or how do mothers specifically or women by decision making, they would turn to see कि क्या है लेबल में. And they were getting wiser about ingredient stories and ingredient like preservatives make fragrance. What are the implications? Phenoxyethanol ka kya significance hai, right? What is going on in my child's skin? What's going on in my skin? So we were the first one to do this whole Label Padho Moms, became a viral campaign, So these are the insights we built out. And of course, the product packaging was a certain type. To cut a long story short, so it became a situation where then I met Darpan and he started talking about, how do we use the power of communities and content to build our brands. And that was a journey of us merging with My Glam at that point in time. And then that began the journey of the Good Glam Group.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. And I see a lot of parallels with, and again, I want to take like a US example of how Mr. Beast, like he had this massive following, and then, the burger chain or say Feastables, like the chocolate bar that he has now. But it came on the back of trust in a content creator, right? In your case, it was like the hard built with a lot of love and effort. I believe the community where, and I'm pretty sure, like I, by the way, researched a little, wherein moms would actually be open and candid about, like the challenges that they were having, and they'd have a community of people who would actually help them with solutions, what work for them, right? So just a space and like a brand that they trust, and then eventually like community-led commerce in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how it built out. One question for you, and because you've actually seen like a community at scale, right? What makes or breaks a community in your opinion? Because I've seen a lot of people attempt it, but there are very few which have grown and scaled and are also engaged. So how do you, like, what's been your learning?
I think two things make a community. One is that the founder has to be involved.
Okay.
I am very clear on that because what I've seen continuously in a very trust deficit society like India, right? People like, ye kya hai? Why are people here together on this community? And when I talk about community, I'm talking about people where there's a two-way interaction, not an audience. Instagram, they say, oh, Instagram community. No, hello, that's an audience. That's an audience, and that's great, but it's an audience. A community is where there's a two-way interaction, right? So, I mean, when you have a founder involved and when you have very strong moderation tools in place, right, that really, really builds out communities. And by the way, that is extremely high touch and extremely difficult to do at scale, right? Which is where you see communities not therefore work for a lot of brands, right? Because, that is one piece to it. And see, in the early stage, founder has to be the face of the community. Over time, you can build in community managers. So let me also caveat it with that. Like with scale, you have the community members themselves become community managers. You see kind of the leader program kind of come in, right? So that's the first piece that builds trust. The second piece that builds trust is actually being very open about your motivations for building the community.
Okay.
So when we build the BabyChakra community, we were very open. We want to build an app that addresses parenting needs. We want to build a space which is safe for you, where we discuss your health, wellness, nutrition needs, right? And partner with you at every step in the way. So we were very open about our motivations. It wasn't like we were just generally saying, oh, this is a parenting community and oh, by the way, we have an app. No, it was always about building out an app.
You were clear about like, this is like a business that we're trying to build.
Yeah, absolutely. Or this is a platform we're trying to build, right? Even when we formed the co-creation activity, right, on products, we had an insider club, the Baby Chakra Insider Club, right? Even there, we brought in insiders from the moms community saying that you're going to help us and we are going to co-create with you the products you would want. and aspire to for your child.
Interesting.
So we were very, very, very clear on our motivations. And I think that is extremely important in communities. Otherwise, you're kind of at dissonance in values.
Correct.
And people value authenticity, they value transparency, they value honesty.
Got it. I think you mentioned a few very interesting things. One question I have for you, you mentioned the founder has to be involved and it's super high touch, right? Don't you get drained after a point in time? That's something that I felt, because like constant buzz, and like if you don't respond, people will like, oh, this is not helpful. So you also have to be active. Does it not get very consuming? Like now, of course not, but like in those days.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And I mean, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, you're in a WhatsApp group, right?
Oh,
and people are asking questions, or, you're on the app and people are asking questions.
Correct.
And, but then I think as a founder in the beginning, you have to do things that are non-scalable.
Correct.
It's the
fair,
fact
yeah.
of life.
Yeah.
And also it is a space where if you're incredibly passionate about building the right answer, right, it doesn't feel like work after a bit.
Okay.
It just feels like every day is learning, every day is something new, you kind of, and the true communities are built, where, and I've had that privilege that, you call it a glimmer, where you see, my God, people feel that you're part of the family. Right? And I've seen those glimmers over time. And I can't tell you, we used to have in the Baby Chakra team saying, Ghar Ghar Baby Chakra. That was our mission.
Oh.
We'd seen it, Gaurav. We were part of families. There was a time when we used to say, Har 8 minute, there's a Baby Chakra baby being born. And because literally every 8 minutes, we were seeing like a news on like, notification saying that my baby is born, baby ko bless kijiye. Or like getting a birthday cake, or saying a picture of a baby in a Baby Chakra onesie. It was really the case. We had that kind of traction on our platform. So those glimmers, I think, kept us going.
Nice. I think that fueled your purpose a lot more.
Massively.
Nice. Have you had bad days? Like I mean, of course you've had, but like I'm just trying to imagine when your work becomes so consuming, right? And it's such a high touch, solution that you're providing to moms. How do you deal with bad days then?
My answer to bad days is to actually sleep it off.
Okay.
So, but to be a little bit more, bad days happen with every entrepreneur, right? And I think over time you kind of learn to deal with every day, good or bad, by the way, with a certain level of equanimity.
Okay.
Because, the good days, earlier has to be like, oh, wow, my God, we've made it. We're like the biggest thing ever. And, this and that and everything. And, then the good day goes, you're back to business, right? So celebrate the good days, be cognizant of the bad days. But I think over time, and especially over 10 years now, I've learned to deal with both good and bad with equanimity.
So, Naiyya, I want to shift gears a little and speak about the business in itself, right? I feel in the past 5 years, the beauty personal care space has just sort of heated up in no other way or in no other sector, right? I mean, you have Nykaa's and like Fabulous. It's now a public company, and Falguni, of course, is a very respected leader. So there are the marketplace models. There are people building their own brands, like Sugar Cosmetics has come in large. Of course, you've also sort of aggregated a lot of brands together and are building like an entire platform level strategy. So we've seen different kinds of models. Within this, we've also seen like a lot of Bollywood influence and different kinds of partnerships, be it launching their own brands via these platforms or say, investing in companies, right? So just speak a little about or share a little to us about how celebrity-led brands are performing in India. And if you could, I also, by the way, read about like the Serena Williams partnership that you did. So if you could speak about that and how do you think it will play out in India?
So, what's happening and the BPC space, you're right, is absolutely like super exciting. It's one of the fastest growing spaces in India, and actually India is the fastest growing BPC market in the world.
Oh, okay.
Right, and it's projected like it's growing at a 10 to 12% CAGR. It's projected to be $35 billion in the next 3 years, 3 to 4 years. So it's really on fire.
It's big, yeah.
It's big, and a lot of that actually comes in the back of the aspiration, right? That's being set by social media. That's being set by the content you're seeing online, by the fact that the world is a global platform now, thanks to Meta and thanks to Twitter and the works, right? X and the works, right?
They keep on changing names,
right? So I mean, the aspiration is very, very high. I think the second thing that's really making us grow as rapidly as it is that now there's actually a respect for Indian brands. And there's a context which is now being set, which is that an Indian brand knows me better than an international brand would.
Correct.
Right. So in the mass premium space, there's actually a preference today for Indian brands. And also there's a space now for luxury beauty that's coming up, which is India first luxury beauty as well, right? So both of these kind of tailwinds, if you will, really are propelling the space out. And of course, like there's one piece on demand. Now the piece on supply is also a lot richer, right? If you look at contract manufacturing, it's become a lot easier now to think about working with top contract manufacturers based across like your Uttarakhand and your Noida or wherever else, Gujarat, right? Who are basically sitting and saying, listen, formulation hum kar denge, manufacturing hum kar denge, standards pure set ho jayenge, QC hum kar lenge.
Brand
right?
aap bana lo.
Right? I mean, of course, like people are backward integrating more and more, but you know that stack is ready. Then we talked about the payment stack, that's ready. The infrastructure stack, the warehousing stack, thanks to delivery, right? That is ready. Rocket, sab kuch. So the stacks, supply and demand side, dono are set. Now, how can this industry not grow on the back of aspiration and on the back of a robust supply ecosystem, right? So, coming to your specific question on, the celebrity piece on the beauty evangelism space, right? I mean, Bollywood or like now creators have always been what set aspiration.
Correct.
That has not changed since my mother's generation, my grandparents' generation, right? Except now creators are in the mix, in the fold, right? So what we're seeing more and more is that a lot of brands are adopting this to clutter break. Right, and to say that, Shraddha, Kapoor's, beauty regime or like the red lipstick that she uses, she's a brand ambassador and investor in My Glam, right? Get that, or like she's talking about it, right, at scale on her platform. By the way, Shraddha Kapoor is I think has the highest digital followership amongst Bollywood, right?
And by the way, Street 2 did like
phenomenally well, right? Yeah. So, I mean, she's a fantastic investor / celebrity to endorse us, right? So, just giving you examples on why celebrities work when they work, because one, they are, either native to the digital audiences that a lot of D2C brands are going after, right? And Shraddha Kapoor is the prime example. Number two, when there's an authenticity in the narrative. Like Shraddha Kapoor is a Bollywood star, right? She is like known for her, her sartorial choices, right? So, I mean, if she talks about lipstick shades, and she's a certain generation as well, right? The early jobbers, that college students, that generation is who she appeals to. So that is a very perfect fit for the kind of brand profile that we also are going after. Resonance is there, right? And therefore the clutter breaking happens. But not every celebrity will do a great job, right? And not for any fault of theirs, but because I mean, there's this whole thing about brand endorsements being done forever, right? So they'll be like, this is another brand that this person is endorsing. So I think you have to look for authenticity, you have to look for the digital nativeness, and then you have to look for a story that kind of clutter breaks through. We did this fantastic campaign. We were talking about Shraddha Kapoor, right? When we were announcing her as a brand ambassador, which broke a lot of records in terms of, her kind of talking to a mysterious person and, her partner wondering who she's talking to, right? And it turned out to be like, she's talking about herself and My Glam, right?
I'll go back and watch that.
You should see that. It's a very interesting campaign. Led to a lot of mystique, but was a great clutter-breaking campaign as well with her for us.
Interesting. And would you say the timing of it also matters? And I'll add some context to it, right? I was actually researching why 1-8 as a brand from Virat Kohli sort of took off. But even Sachin Tendulkar launched True Blue in April. We had like MS Dhoni launch 7, his brand, but they are not as popular as Virat's 1-8, right? And while of course both of these are equally, or I mean there is no comparison between all three, but in the A+ level of stars, right? But an insight that I got was they launched it towards the later half of their career when the peak was behind them, whereas Virat launched it when like in 2017 when he was actually just around his peak, and he still is at his peak, right? So would you say the timing of it also matters?
It definitely does. And I think there's this whole piece around going back to saying that when you're a celebrity led brand, right? A lot depends on what the celebrity's brand stands for at that point in time.
Okay.
Right? Because you're kind of borrowing off on that trust, on that platform. So if that platform has lesser of a followership, right, your brand will not probably get that much followership at that point in time as well, right? Because it's all like a halo effect that follows through. So that timing certainly matters, right? But I think the second thing that we cannot emphasize enough, and I don't speak for these brands because I don't know them well enough, but it really goes back to saying that once the customer, so the top funnel, the celebrity will create for you, but the product has to deliver. If the product doesn't deliver on the product promise, if it's not priced correctly, if it's not available at the points of sale that the product needs to be positioned at, right? If there's a blockage on the supply chain, right? Then it's a problem. So it's not just about creating a top of funnel. It actually has to be supported by the entire product supply chain and also the product promise.
Got it. And to drive purchase again, like the product has to deliver.
100%. And beauty, personal care, for the most part, is a very high retention business.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the retention, then you can't play that game.
Makes sense. And just if you could share a little about the partnership with Serena Williams as well, I think that'd be really...
Sure, that was actually orchestrated by my partner Darpan, right? And when I joined the group, he told us at that point in time that we have Serena being signed up, and in full confidence for the last 3 years we've been keeping it under wraps.
Must be very difficult.
It was a difficult thing to do, to keep it under wraps, because it's such an amazing privilege, right, to be partnering with her. And what was actually a very proud moment, honestly, Gaurav, was that this is the largest mainstream beauty launch that an Indian company has done in the US.
Oh, okay.
So we launched across 675, 700 odd Ulta stores offline in the US. And it is the largest mainstream beauty launch, right? And of course with someone like Serena. So you can imagine the eyeballs we got. We were on every daily talk show. We were everywhere.
Nice.
So that has actually been an incredible experience. Yeah.
Nice. And I'm glad, and kudos to you and the team. It's very lovely to see Indian companies having global aspirations and actually going there and making it or rather announcing it to the world that India's arrived. So thank you so much for doing that, and more power to you to do that.
Thank you. But I think there's a lot of us entrepreneurs who have global aspirations from get-go, right? I mean, including yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to ask a little also about, given you position yourself as content-led commerce, and content is a big part of what you do at the Good Glam Group as well. Do you think, and a question that I want a hot take on from you is, do you think the creator economy is hyped? Is there a lot of substance, or it's just more fluff?
I think it's just starting.
Okay.
I think it's just starting. We're in the very, very early days of the creator economy. I mean, how old is the industry? Not even 5 years old. Think about it,
you
right?
Could say, yeah.
And right now you're just looking at the tools being made, the stacks being made for the creator economy, right? So right now what you see, of course, is a sort of phase 1 of the creator economy, which is where phase 1 could take us, and which is petering out now, because what's happening here is what we were discussing earlier. The top creators are making all the money. The micro and the sort of the long tail creators are figuring out ways to monetize, right? And that's that is when there will be another shift that has to happen, because it's not like the creators are going anywhere. Right? In fact, you're getting more and more people with the aspiration to be creators, right? You're seeing more and more sort of companies come up to serve them from a SaaS perspective, from a management perspective, from a monetization perspective, from a tokenization perspective. We're seeing a lot from a product creation perspective, right? So I think there's going to be a phase 2 of the creator economy, which is going to happen pretty soon, where a lot of these creators are now going to become truly micro entrepreneurs at scale, right? And the way you kind of see a whole space around SMEs, right? And SME manufacturers, same thing's going to happen for creators at scale. So I think we're in very, very early days of the creator economy. So I think it's too early to say it's hyped, because where we are today is at the end of one level. It's the beginning of another one that's soon to come, for sure.
Got it. So you're saying much like how in the BPC space, you had, the contract manufacturer, sort of that stack coming up, the supply chain delivery, ShipRocket coming up, the payments also. So you see something similar adjacent ecosystem to sort of get developed, and that's how the creator economy.
Correct.
Interesting. I also actually want to ask you a few personal questions, and this has been a lot about business, but I feel what you do outside of work also fuels into it, right? I've seen you spend a lot of time on the boards of Wellspin now, and then with team as well. So if you could share responsibilities about what does being on the board of a company you haven't started, or an entity that you haven't started, looks like, and how do you make the time for it, honestly?
So, two very different entities, as you'd imagine, right? Wellspun Living is part of the Wellspun Group, which is a $5 billion publicly listed conglomerate, right? Wellspun is an extremely amazing company, extremely interesting as well, because every fourth towel sold in the US is actually a Wellspun towel, right? They have, every third bedsheet is a Wellspun bedsheet. It's massive. It's a giant in international markets, right? And India, of course, is the largest exporter after China of textiles in the world, right? So, I mean, and of that, Wellspun is like the leading company. So you can imagine it's really, really, really relevant. And the role I play on the board is that of an independent director. As an independent director, my responsibility is actually towards the shareholders, right?
Correct.
And to the retail investors, etc. So it's a very interesting, role that I end up playing, which is understanding where the promoters are going, what their vision is, really being able to figure out ways to help them achieve their vision of value creation for the entity, and at the same time keeping a very sharp eye out with my fellow independent directors on governance. Right? And that's what a regular independent director's job is to do. I think what also is exciting about Wellspun is the fact that it's also led by this amazing woman founder, right? Dipali. So, of course, there's BKG, there's Rajesh RRM, and then there's Dipali Goenka, right? So, these three promoters, if you will, are extremely inspiring, right? Because they each play to their strengths, right? So, I think overall it's been that experience, right? As an independent director that I find myself on the Wellspun board. Now, on team, it's a very different entity, right? It's a non-profit, the Mumbai Tech Entrepreneurs Association of Mumbai. And it's a very fledgling entity. It was set up literally 2 years back.
2022, if I'm not
Yeah, correct, right? And it's like, this is the first year of us having a very formal governing council construct where I had to stand for elections, get voted in, It's a very formal construct. And I mean, it's amazing to see it kind of grow into this construct and to build a name for itself in the whole sort of tech ecosystem in India in such a rapid period of time.
And one question I want to ask you, and again, you've been involved in sort of just promoting, encouraging, and sort of being the torchbearer of women entrepreneurship in India, right? My question to you is, how do we have more of them? What do you think needs to get better? Because I feel at the entry level, there's a good proportion of both genders. And of course, I don't mean to be non-binary here, but just for the context of this conversation, we have equal representation at the starting line, but then as we move along the line through the careers, that ratio sort of changes. So what do we do so that there's a good balance and we have more leaders, female leaders, women leaders at the top?
It's a very important question, and it's something that, of course, I've spent a significant part of my life working on. Not just me, a lot of people, right? Men and women both. I think the first piece is that we talk a lot about this, and I'll harp it till whatever has to happen changes, right? I think the whole funding and the fund flows. While there are enough studies now that indicate, and the BCG study, the Harvard studies that have talked longitudinally, tracked men and female run ventures at scale, and said that actually women return more capital on the dollar than men do in many cases, right? And in most venture funded cases, funding into women led ventures is still very low, and the reason for that we see is because, not we see, but we also see is because on the other side, right, your GP and LPs are largely male. So they kind of fund stuff that they understand, or into entrepreneurs they understand well, or they have a network with, or they feel comfort with, right? There's a lot of pattern recognition that VCs have to do given the nature of their business. And they pattern recognize with what they already know, which is men. So funding flows needs work urgently to set this right? Because once you're funded, then you can grow, you can scale. Capital is the lifeblood of business. The second is role modeling. I speak a lot at the engineering schools across the country, right? So IIT is like second home, especially during the entrepreneurship events that they have. And, this time I saw in IIT Bombay, there were 25% women, which is fantastic,
exactly,
right?
That's great.
That's the input in incoming batch is fab. But when you ask the audience, right, how many, name 10 female entrepreneurs, no one raises a hand. But if you ask, name 10 male entrepreneurs, everybody's like,
IIT Bombay se bata denge.
Exactly, right? So, but there are more and more women building amazing companies, right? So why aren't their stories more mainstream? So that is the other effort that we're all doing together across ecosystems, right? Across Startup India, across Team, across Harvard Entrepreneur, Alumni Entrepreneurs Council, across the work we've done with mainstream media like Mint, CNBC, etc., to get the word out about amazing women who are building amazing companies at scale.
Got it. I think the fact you mentioned about role modeling, I think that's very true and much needed, because when you have like an inspiration or like a relatable inspiration, you start believing that even I can get there.
Correct.
And once it's there, like, of course.
We were
results come
discussing
in.
this
Yeah.
as well, right? I mean, like for
Yeah.
you to see an alumni from BITS Pilani and to know that this person can get to this point,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, if he or she can do it, so can I.
Yeah, correct.
So we want to set the same narrative.
Yeah, makes sense. Amazing. Just last two questions, and this is coming from a place of, people who want to build their own businesses, right? What are opportunities you think exist? And you spoke briefly about, like, in the creator economy space as well, but just generally in the BPC space, creator economy community that, one could think about building for the next 5-10 years.
So, I mean, I said this in the very beginning, that the riches and niches,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you think about BPC, there are enough and more niches to actually sort of look at and really build for, right? I mean, there's a whole resurgence, of course, and we discussed this, right, of India and the India story.
Correct.
But I think building the India story for the world from a product perspective, I think is super exciting. What do I mean by that? I mean, Vadam is one example in the tea space, right? We're doing that from a color cosmetics
Correct,
perspective.
yeah.
Though that's not an India story. It's actually like a mainstream US brand that we've launched.
Correct.
But imagine if we were to launch, how like in some sense, Forest Essentials has done that, but in a very
Correct,
small
yeah,
way
correct,
today,
yeah.
to be frank. But that I think is a big opportunity, right? Building an India story for the international global audience, right? And you're seeing also companies like this come up. Like you see a Ranawat, you see a Fable and Main, I think the company is. You see what even Deepa's doing with her company, right? India Wild. So there is certainly, I think, opportunities there across food, across personal care, for sure, and across, wellness. I think these three pieces are very interesting place that one can leverage on as an Indian entrepreneur building for the world. The second question you asked me was in terms of,
With respect to, say, creator economy or community also.
I think it's about building the stacks out.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in generative AI, for instance, right? And how do you make a creator's heavy lifting much easier and let the creator do, it's like the analogy I talked about, right? In BPC, the contract manufacturing, the distribution, the
Payments,
distribution stacks, the payment stack, that kind of accelerates what a brand needs to do.
Correct.
Right? Similarly, think of the creator as a brand.
Okay.
Right? And how do you therefore become like that stack that supports a creator in letting her or him build his brand out, be smart about his or her scaling on distribution, but ensure that the bedrock is set. Right? And then how do you leverage that stack as and when you require? So I think that's a very big opportunity on the creator economy space.
Got it.
And you're seeing plays come out around this.
Something like NAS Daily also does.
Yeah, they do that. They're doing this. So basically they're saying, don't be, and NAS has actually been a partner to Good Glam. I brokered that partnership with NAS and with Meta for our brand communities at scale, right? That we built out at Good Glam. And what NAS has done is very interesting as well, to your point, right? Where they're saying that the platforms are borrowed for the most part. You're looking at your Instagram platform. These are all borrowed platforms. How do you create your own communities? Which is the next big way forward. Obviously, you want to own your community and your audience, right? So I think these are all the stacks that are getting made today. And those are the stacks I would invest in or build for if I were looking at the creator economy, for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense as well, right? About how like a platform play will, I mean, with the rising trend and with the rising wave, even you will rise if you are able to sort of build like shovels for the gold market in some sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. And just one last question before we move on to the rapid fire, and it's more deeply personal because I'm building out my team. You've built teams for the past decade or more, right? And I'm sure you must have had like some amazing hires as well. What are a few qualities that you've seen in some of the best hires you've had, and how do you sort of, if you can, test it in the interview process itself? I think that'd be like really wonderful to hear from you.
I think the ability to unlearn and learn very rapidly.
Okay.
And do it with a sense of humility. Because what I've seen is that, in a world where things are rapidly changing, there's only so much credence you can give to experience. Because, even me, like when I start off, or as in when I start off another company, whatever else I do, right, the experience I've had in the past were a certain paradigm. Right? 2015 was a different paradigm from 2020, was a different paradigm from whatever, right?
Correct.
Happens next.
Everything,
Or as I continue building as well, to be frank. So I think what I look for and what I find in my most successful team members is that at every day they're learning very voraciously, and they're also unlearning some of the
breaking old patterns. Yeah.
breaking old patterns, or breaking this is how business was done, or this is how growth was done, this is how scale happens. They keep on unlearning that as well. So those are the best hires, and do it with a sense of humility, right? I realize, I mean, one of the biggest things that I can't emphasize enough, teamwork is so critical. There's not one individual player who's going to make or break a company.
True, very true.
Right? So if you do it with a false sense of arrogance, right, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
Be proud of your work, but there's no need to be arrogant.
Yeah.
So, have a sense of humility, and in that humility, you find the ability to unlearn very quickly and learn very quickly as well.
Got it. And is there a way you can test it during the interview process?
I do a lot of case studies.
Okay. Oh,
I use my consulting
jobs.
background
Yeah.
for case studies, and
Okay.
I do that a lot.
Got it. Perhaps, just if you can give us one example, say if you were hiring for a head of growth for one of the brands, right? Somebody who has to handle P&L, how would you perhaps give them like a question in which you're able to see how they're able to break their old patterns with new information? Sorry, I'm putting you on a spot, but
No,
if you
that's
can
all
share
right.
that.
What I would do is probably I'd ask them a question. I'd lay out a certain product
Okay.
that we're bringing to market. I'd talk about the cohort of the product we're going after as early adopter audiences. And I'd say, what would your strategy be to get this audience or the early adopter audience to at least sample the product at the lowest CAC possible, right? So something quite specific, but also kind of broad. And then the person would kind of lay out the different routes, right? And we would brainstorm in terms of, potential CACs on each route.
Channels,
Correct. CACs by channels. And then we'd basically arrive at, an understanding of which channel he or she believes to be the most potent and how much monies need to be attributed to it. So it's like a thorough, it's like being in office and brainstorming with team live.
Like a real, something that you would experience in a day-to-day setting.
Correct. And then you kind of see the relevancy, the recency of information, of experience. You kind of see how much are they willing to unlearn, like take on new channels which are completely left field from, contrarian perspectives today, and be willing to experiment. So you kind of test a few things, right? When in that conversation also you see the humility.
Yeah, that comes out.
Right? How they would collaborate with other functions that would make it a success.
How would they react to newer information perhaps?
Yes, absolutely.
Got it.
How consumer centric they are. So many things you can test for in a case study.
Yeah. I was actually speaking to this one person who said that he said whenever he hires for like senior leadership, he would interview them at stretch for at least 4 to 5 hours, because he said कितना भी कोई polished हो ना, वो 3 घंटे तक put up कर सकता है अपना वो polished nature या फिर like that cover, but after 3 hours people, because they're exhausted, they put their guards down, and that is when his true test sort of starts, is what he said.
What I end up doing, I don't do this as much.
Okay.
I do the case study, typically lasts about an hour and a half at best, especially for a senior role. I do a lot of very thorough reference checks, because you get a sense of how the person was in a previous role, and not just in the previous role, but in the role prior to that.
Okay.
Right? And not just across like the person that person reported to, but across peers as well.
Okay.
Because it gives you a 360 on that person, which in that workplace, in the moment of pressure, right? In a moment of like failure, how did that person respond?
Yeah.
Would that person be hired back again or be welcomed back again, right? I'd spend a lot of time on reference checks. Let me put it this way.
Interesting. But would you say they can be biased to some extent because it's dependent on context? While I understand you do thoroughly and so many people, so you can spot patterns.
Definitely. See, for very, very critical hires, and we've been fortunate to also have at certain stages been employers of choice, right? What we've done and what has worked out beautifully for us has been, you come and work with us for a week.
Okay.
So we've done that as well.
Okay.
And I definitely think it works better in smaller organizations, especially starting off. And we've had some of our best hires through that process. And leaders through that process, right? Where people have come and worked with us for about a week. They also get a sense of, we've also had people say that no, this is not for us. It's too much uncertainty, or too much ambiguity in the problem statement. And that's fine. You've also learned, we've also learned,
Correct.
right? No harm, no foul. But we've also equally had people who said, oh my God, I absolutely love the culture.
Nice.
I love the problems we're solving for. I love interacting with the consumers we're solving for. The product journeys excite me.
Nice.
And that works.
It's a good dipstick for both parties in some sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I tell my team all the time, and I tell a lot of other folks who reach out to me for this. I'm like, you are also interviewing the organization. The organization not only interviewing you, you're also interviewing
It's
the
a two-way
organization. It's a
street.
two-way street.
Yeah. makes sense. Amazing. Thank you so much, Naiyya, for that. I have a very quick rapid fire round for you. These are actually questions which are very personal to you in some sense. And so don't think so much, just, sort of ask, just answer whatever comes to your mind first, right? Your favorite Japanese food place in Mumbai?
Coco
Okay. Where is that?
in Lower Parel.
Coco in Lower
Yeah,
Parel.
in Kamla Mills.
Okay. A beauty brand that you admire outside of your portfolio?
Charlotte Tilbury.
Okay. Yeah. Which country is it from?
It's from the UK, I think.
Okay.
But it's like it's got like a cult following.
Okay. Interesting. Who, according to you, is the most solid startup founder in India today?
Oh my
Just
God.
one name. I know there are tons of them. Just one that comes to your mind. And who?
I really think the way Harsh is building Dream 11 is quite fantastic.
Okay, amazing. What is Naiyya's idea of a vacation?
Digital detox.
Okay, like just disconnect.
Just disconnect. And I could be anywhere in the world. I could be at home here. But
Okay.
if I just put it on flight mode, that is my idea of a vacation.
Interesting. What is comfort food for you?
Dal chawal.
Yeah? Are
Yeah.
you like a proper dal
Yeah.
chawal person?
Yeah.
Nice. I know you're a big, I believe you're into painting as well yourself, and you are a big fan, and we can see, of course, that you are a big fan of like collectibles. Which is your most precious collectible?
It's actually that painting over there.
Okay.
It's made by Jayashree Berman. And it was commissioned to her by my mother when I sold Baby Chakra. So it's actually a mother with 2 children.
Correct.
So it was like almost like something that my mother actually got commissioned for me when I sold the
And
company.
you have an elder sister as well.
I do.
Right?
So that actually, you're right. It's a significance of my mother basically saying, now my children are growing up.
Oh, pretty cool. Pretty cool. And Miss Berman is based out of Calcutta or like?
No, I think she's out of Delhi, if I'm not
Okay.
wrong. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Amazing. And just one last, which you've answered a little, but again, I'll ask you, what is Naiyya's superpower? Like a strength that she knows, she's the spiky strength that we were speaking about. What is Naiyya's spiky strength?
I would say my resilience.
Yeah? Wow. Amazing. Perfect. I mean, these were the questions we had. Thank you so much for being so candid. And I'm sure we've gotten a lot of insights into running like a business at scale from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I mean, I've loved this conversation. Like I said, it's always fun and great talking to a fellow entrepreneur. And all the best to you as well.